The knock came just after midnight. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a desperate, frantic banging that rattled the thick oak door of the ranch house, the kind of sound that rips you from sleep and puts ice in your veins. James Thornton swung the door open, a silhouette of a giant against the warm lamplight behind him. And there she was. A little girl, couldn't be more than 10, standing barefoot in the biting February snow. Her face was a mess of tears and something else, something dark that stained her cheek. Blood. "Please, mister," she choked out, her small hands clutching the doorframe to stay upright. "They beat my mama. She's dying. Please." Before James could even process the words, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. He caught her just before she hit the ground, a bundle of rags and cold flesh that weighed almost nothing in his massive arms. He stood there for a second, the freezing wind whipping around him, staring down at the unconscious child. Her dress was threadbare, soaked through. Her lips were already turning blue. This was trouble, the kind of trouble that gets good men killed. And James Thornton knew, in that instant, he was about to walk right into it. "Emma!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the rafters. "Get blankets! Hot water! Now!" His daughter, Emma, appeared at the top of the stairs. Just 9 years old, with her mother's kind eyes and her father's stubborn chin, her blonde braids a mess from sleep. She didn't ask a single question. She saw the girl in her father's arms, the blood, the snow, and she flew into action, her small bare feet slapping against the wooden floor as she raced to gather supplies. James carried the girl into the kitchen, the heart of the house. He laid her gently on the long wooden table near the cook stove, the only warm spot. As he wrapped her in thick wool blankets, rubbing her frozen feet, trying to force life back into them, the child began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open. They were dark, wild, like a cornered animal. They fixed on his face. "Mama," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "The men, they came. They hurt her bad. Where, child? Where is your mama?" "The cabin," she gasped, fighting to stay conscious. "The old Miller place, by Copper Creek." James knew it, a derelict cabin 7 miles northeast, through some of the roughest country in Paradise Valley, abandoned for years, a place no one would go unless they were hiding. "Who's your mama?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "Catherine Shaw. We came last week. Mama said we'd be safe here." Her voice broke, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her dirty cheeks. "Please, mister. She's all alone." Just then, Emma appeared at his side with a tin cup of warm milk, sweetened with a dollop of honey. "Here," Emma said softly, her voice a balm. She helped the girl sit up, holding the cup to her lips. "Drink this. Papa will help your mama. He always helps people." James met his daughter's gaze over the child's head. The unwavering trust in her eyes was like an anchor, settling something deep in his chest. "Stay with her, Em," he said, his voice low and firm. "Keep her warm. I'm taking Doc Henderson and riding out." "I'm going too," the girl said, trying to push herself off the table. Her legs gave out instantly, buckling beneath her. James caught her easily. "No, you're not," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've done your part. Brave as any soldier I've ever heard of. You got help. Now you let me do mine." Within 20 minutes, James was saddled on his best stallion, a powerful beast named Shadow. Beside him, Dr. Howard Henderson, a wiry man of 60 with more grit than a whole platoon of younger men, adjusted himself in his own saddle. They rode hard. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, but it cast enough light on the fresh snow for them to follow the winding path of Copper Creek. Their breath plumed in the frigid air, the only sounds the crunch of hooves and the whistle of the wind. Every mile they covered, a cold knot of dread tightened in James's gut. 7 miles. A 10-year-old girl had run 7 miles through a blizzard, barefoot, in the dead of night. Whatever they were riding toward, It was born of pure desperation and pure evil. The Miller cabin appeared as a dark shape against the snow, just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gray. The front door hung open on one hinge, swinging back and forth in the wind like a broken limb. It was an invitation, or a warning. James swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, his hand instinctively going to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. "Doc, you wait here. Don't come in till I call for you." He moved toward the cabin, slow and low, every sense on high alert. The inside was a wreck. Furniture was overturned, splintered into pieces. Dishes were smashed against the far wall. It looked like a storm had torn through the small room, and in the corner, on a thin, filthy mattress, lay a woman. She was so still, so pale, that James's heart sank. For a horrifying second, he thought they were too late. Then he saw it, a shallow, labored rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, barely. "Doc!" he yelled. "Now!" Dr. Henderson rushed in, his medical bag already open. He pushed past James, all business. James lit the oil lamp on the mantel, and in the flickering golden light, he got his first real look at Catherine Shaw. Even battered and unconscious, there was something striking about her. Dark hair, almost black, was splayed across the grimy pillow like spilled ink. She had high cheekbones and a strong jaw that spoke of a stubborn will. Her face was a canvas of fresh, ugly bruises. One eye was swollen completely shut, her lip was split wide open. But it was the way she was lying that made James's teeth clench. One arm was cradled unnaturally against her ribs. He'd seen enough bar fights and ranching accidents to know broken bones when he saw them. 3, maybe 4 broken ribs, Doc confirmed, his fingers probing gently but expertly. Bad concussion. This arm's got a clean fracture just above the wrist. Doc looked up at James, his weathered face grim. "She's been beaten within an inch of her life, James. Another hour in this cold." He didn't need to finish. They both knew. "Can we move her?" James asked. "We have to. She needs warmth, food, real care. But we have to be damn careful." Doc paused, his eyes locking with James's. "Whoever did this, son, they meant to kill her. There's no other explanation for this kind of brutality." A chilling thought followed. "And they'll likely come back," Doc said, his voice barely a whisper, "just to make sure they finish the job." A cold, hard fury settled deep in James's gut. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long, long time. "Then they'll find me waiting for them." They worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift travois from a couple of old blankets and the poles from the broken bed frame. They secured Catherine as gently as they could, but as they lifted her, a low moan of pure agony escaped her lips. The sound was so full of pain, it made James's hands shake with rage. Rage at the cowards who had done this. Rage at a world where a woman and her child could be hunted down like animals in the dead of winter. The journey back was agonizingly slow. It took twice as long. James walked the entire way, his hand on the travois, steadying it over every bump, his eyes scanning the tree line, his rifle now resting in the crook of his arm. Doc had ridden ahead to get things ready. By the time they reached the Thornton Ranch, the sun was fully up. Emma had the guest room prepared, the bed sheets turned down, a fire roaring in the hearth, and a pot of water already heating on the stove. The little girl, Lucy, she'd told Emma her name was, stood at the front window, her small face pressed against the cold glass. When she saw the travois, she flew. Down the stairs and out the front door, barefoot in the snow again, before Emma could stop her. "Mama!" she cried, a raw, desperate sound. She threw herself toward the travois, and James had to move fast, catching her before she could jostle her injured mother. "Easy there, little one," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Your mama's hurt bad. But Doc's here. He's going to fix her up. The best way you can help now is to be calm. You understand me?" Lucy nodded. tears streaming down her face, her small body trembling. Is she going to die? James knelt, bringing his massive frame down to her level. Even kneeling, he towered over her. He looked her square in the eye. Not if I have anything to say about it, he said, and the words were a vow. And when I give my word, I keep it. They got Catherine settled upstairs. Doc Henderson worked for what felt like an eternity, setting the broken arm, stitching the deep cut on her lip, carefully wrapping her bruised ribs. James found Emma and Lucy sitting on the top step of the stairs, huddled together. Emma had her arm around the younger girl's shoulders, whispering stories about the ranch, about her favorite horse, about the time her papa had rescued a calf from a frozen creek. His daughter looked up as he approached, her blue eyes wide with questions. He gave her a single, slow nod. Relief washed over her face. Mama's going to be okay, Emma told Lucy with the unshakable confidence of a 9-year-old. I told you, Papa fixes everything. If only that were true, James thought. Fixing broken bones was one thing. But whatever darkness had chased Catherine and Lucy Shaw into that abandoned cabin, whatever violence had found them there, that was a different kind of broken. And it would take a lot more than splints and stitches to fix. Doc finally emerged from the room, wiping his hands on a rag. She's stable, he said, his voice tired. Sleeping now. The laudanum will keep her under for a while. She'll need round-the-clock care for at least a week. Then months of recovery. Those ribs, she won't be able to do much more than walk carefully for a long time. She'll get it, James said without hesitation. Whatever she needs. There's more, Doc said, his voice dropping lower. He led James a few feet down the hall, away from the girls. She has old scars, James, on her back, on her arms. Faded, but they're there. This isn't the first time someone's laid a hand on her. James felt that cold fury stir again. And judging by the calluses on her hands, Doc continued, and the way she's built, she's strong despite all this. I'd say she's been taking care of herself, and that little girl, for a long, long time. She's a fighter. James nodded slowly. She'd have to be. To send her daughter 7 miles through a blizzard. So you're planning on keeping them here? Doc asked, studying his friend's face. Until I find out who did this, James said, his voice flat and hard, and make damn sure they can't do it again. Then we'll see what Mrs. Shaw wants to do. Doc put a hand on his shoulder. You're a good man, James Thornton. Just be careful. Whoever did this is still out there, and they might come looking. I know, James said quietly, his eyes drifting back to the closed guest room door. I'm counting on it. Lucy refused to leave her mother's side, so James carried a small cot into the guest room and set it up right beside the bed. Emma brought in extra blankets and pillows, and together they made a cozy nest for the little girl. By the time full daylight had flooded the house, both girls were fast asleep. Lucy was curled on her cot, one small hand stretched out, her fingers just barely touching her mother's. Emma was slumped in a large armchair beside them, her head pillowed on her arms. James stood in the doorway, watching the scene. A strange feeling bloomed in his chest. It was like a loosening of some tight, hard knot he hadn't even realized was there. A thawing of walls he'd built 9 years ago, the day he buried his wife, Sarah. His ranch house had been quiet for so long, just him and Emma, the steady, predictable rhythm of the seasons and the cattle. It was efficient, orderly, safe. But now, with these 2 strangers under his roof, it felt alive again. And that scared him almost as much as it comforted him. Catherine Shaw didn't wake for 2 full days. Doc came twice a day, changing her bandages, checking her vitals. James found himself making excuses to stay in the house, fussing with bookkeeping he usually left for the evenings, mending tack by the kitchen fire instead of in the barn. He couldn't stay away. Emma and Lucy, meanwhile, had become inseparable. It was a transformation in his own daughter that astonished him. Emma had always been a solitary child, content with her books and her animals. But with Lucy, she blossomed. She became fiercely protective, a little mother hen. She taught Lucy how to card wool, how to mix biscuit dough. She showed her all the secret spots on the ranch, the hollow log where the foxes denned, the flat rock by the creek that was perfect for sunning. And Lucy, once she was certain her mother was out of danger, proved to be sharp as a tack and brave as they come. She threw herself into helping around the house with a fierce determination to earn their keep. At 10 years old, she could cook better than most of the ranch hands' wives, and she had a quiet, gentle way with the animals that reminded James so much of Emma. The house was filled with a new kind of energy, the soft murmur of the girls' voices, the smell of baking, the sight of 2 small pairs of boots by the door. It felt like a home. On the 3rd morning, James brought a pitcher of fresh water up to the guest room and found Catherine awake. Her eyes were open, dark, intelligent eyes. They tracked his every movement as he crossed the room, wary and assessing. Even beaten and broken, lying in a stranger's bed, she held herself with a kind of fierce dignity that made him slow his steps. It made him conscious of his own size, of how he must look to her. A giant of a man in whose house she had woken up, a prisoner of his charity. "You're safe," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. He set the pitcher on the bedside table. "My name is James Thornton. This is my ranch. Your daughter. She came for help 3 nights ago." "Lucy," Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Where?" "She's fine. Downstairs with my daughter Emma. They're probably plotting some kind of mischief." He pulled a chair over, deliberately sitting so he wouldn't tower over her. "You want to tell me what happened?" Catherine's eyes closed for a long moment. When she opened them again, a shutter had come down, something hard and guarded. "No." "Fair enough," James said, though it wasn't. "You want to tell me your name?" "You already know it." "I know what Lucy told me, Catherine Shaw, but I don't know where you came from or why you were hiding in that abandoned cabin." He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but firm. "And I need to know, Mrs. Shaw, because whoever did this to you, they might come back. They won't find us here." Her voice was certain. "How can you be so sure?" For the first time, a flicker of raw fear broke through her composure. "Because if they knew where we were," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "they would have come already." That told James everything he needed to know. This wasn't a random act of violence. They were being hunted. "Are you running from the law?" he asked bluntly. "No." The answer was quick, sharp, and certain. "I've broken no laws. Then what are you running from?" "I don't owe you any explanations, Mr. Thornton." She tried to push herself up, to sit straighter, but a sharp gasp of pain escaped her lips, and she fell back against the pillows, a sheen of sweat breaking out on her forehead. "I appreciate your help, truly. But as soon as I can travel, Lucy and I will be gone. We won't bring our trouble to your door." James stood up, and he watched her try not to flinch as his shadow fell over her. It made something in his chest ache. "Doc says you won't be fit to travel for months," he said, his voice flat. "Those ribs need time. Your arm needs to heal. And winter's got another 6 weeks left in it, easy." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. "You're welcome to stay until then. No strings attached." He turned back to look at her. "But if someone is hunting you, Mrs. Shaw, I need to know who. I have a daughter to protect too." He left her there, her dark eyes staring after him, and went downstairs to find his foreman, Tom Pritchard. Tom was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and talking quietly with Doc Henderson, who was making his morning visit. Both men looked up as James entered. "She's awake?" Doc asked. "Awake," James confirmed, pouring himself a cup of coffee, "and scared half to death." He stood at the window, watching Emma and Lucy trying to build a snowman out of the powdery snow. "She won't tell me what she's running from." You could make her leave, Tom suggested, ever practical. Tom had been on the Thornton Ranch for 15 years. He was loyal and good, but he was also a cautious man. No shame in protecting your own boss. James turned from the window. I'm not turning a beaten woman and a child out into the winter with nowhere to go, Tom. That's not who I am. He set his cup down on the counter with a firm click. But we're not going into this blind either. His eyes met his foreman's. Tom, I need you to ride into Cedar Falls. Talk to Sheriff Morrison. Don't tell him they're here. Just ask questions. See if anyone's reported a missing woman and child. Check the hotel registers, the boarding houses for the last few weeks. Ask the telegraph operator if any messages have come through about a Catherine Shaw. He paused, a new thought striking him. And ask if anyone else has been asking questions, anyone who doesn't belong. Tom nodded, his expression serious. You think she's in real trouble? I think someone beat her half to death and left her to freeze in an abandoned cabin, James said, his voice grim. That's trouble enough for me. Now I need to find out if that trouble has a name, and if it's coming our way. A week passed. A strange, tense, domestic rhythm settled over the ranch house. Catherine slowly began to heal. She could sit up in bed without help. She could take a few halting steps around the room, her broken arm in a sling, her ribs tightly bound. She was polite, guarded. She thanked James for every meal tray, for the fresh firewood, for the books he brought up for her to read. But she kept a distance, an invisible wall between them that was as solid as stone. James found himself drawn to that wall, wanting to know what was on the other side. He'd bring her the ranch ledgers, explaining the business, talking about the cattle prices, the weather, anything to fill the silence, to see a flicker of something in her wary eyes. And sometimes he did. He saw a sharp intelligence there, a quick grasp of numbers and strategy that surprised him. This was not a helpless woman. This was a woman who was used to being in control, now forced into a position of utter dependence. And she hated it. On the 8th day, Tom Pritchard returned from Cedar Falls. James met him in the barn, away from the house. Well? James asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Nothing, Tom said, swinging down from his horse. Sheriff hasn't heard a thing. No missing persons reports matching their description. Nothing at the hotels. Telegraph operator says the name Catherine Shaw hasn't come over the wire. James felt a knot of frustration. It was a dead end. But, Tom said, his voice dropping, there is something else. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was a wanted poster, but not a real one. It was crudely drawn, a sketch of a woman's face. It was rough, but the high cheekbones, the dark hair, the stubborn chin, it was unmistakably Catherine. Underneath the drawing were the words, $500 reward for information leading to Kate Peterson. Inquire with U.S. Marshal Frank Peterson, Denver. Peterson. The name meant nothing to James, but there was more. Tom had talked to a bounty hunter who'd been passing through, a man who'd just come from Denver. He said this Marshal Peterson has been flashing this poster all over, Tom explained. But he's not working official channels. He's asking questions quietly, in saloons, livery stables. He's not looking for a criminal, he's looking for a ghost. A cold dread trickled down James's spine. What do you mean? The bounty hunter said the story in Denver is that this Kate Peterson's husband, Charles, was a businessman. Got himself into some bad trouble with a partner named Victor Marsh. When Charles died, Marsh claimed Kate owed him everything. She refused, and then she just vanished. With her daughter. Tom looked James square in the eye. The bounty hunter said Marsh is a bad man, the kind of man who doesn't like to be told no. And this U.S. Marshal, Frank Peterson? He's Charles's brother. He's not looking for his sister-in-law to help her. He's hunting her for Victor Marsh. So that was it. A business dispute, a greedy partner, a corrupt lawman. It was ugly, but it was simple. Then Tom delivered the final piece. the piece that changed everything. The bounty hunter said one other thing, boss. He said Charles Peterson wasn't just any businessman. Tom hesitated. They say he was one of the best counterfeiters in the West, and when he died, his engraving plates, the ones used to print the fake currency, they vanished, right along with his wife and daughter. The air in the barn suddenly felt heavy, cold. James stared at the crude drawing of Catherine's face. Kate Peterson. He hadn't just brought a widow into his home. He had brought in a woman who was being hunted by a U.S. Marshal and a dangerous criminal, not for a debt, but for the key to a fortune in counterfeit money, and he and his daughter were now standing right in the middle of it. James walked back to the house, the crude wanted poster folded in his pocket, feeling like it was burning a hole through the fabric. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The hiding, the running, the brutal beating that wasn't meant to scare her, but to make her talk, or to silence her for good. The reason she couldn't go to the law, because the law itself was hunting her. He found her standing at the window of the guest room, looking out at the vast, snow-covered expanse of his valley. Her back was to him. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly, without turning around. Her voice was stronger now, less of a rasp. "My father left me the land," he said, his own voice tight. "I built the rest." "And your wife?" The question was soft, unexpected. "She died 9 years ago, when Emma was born." Catherine turned then, and for a moment the guarded mask slipped. He saw a flicker of genuine sympathy in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lucy's father, my husband. He died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. Charles Peterson, the counterfeiter." "Is that when you started running?" James asked, his voice cold. She stiffened immediately. The mask was back, harder than ever. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do, Mrs. Peterson." He saw the flash of shock, then fear in her eyes as he used the name. He pulled the poster from his pocket and unfolded it, holding it out for her to see. She stared at the crude drawing of her own face, her good hand flying to her mouth. All the color drained from her cheeks. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "My foreman just got back from Cedar Falls. Seems your brother-in-law has been asking questions." He took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "He's not just looking for a grieving widow, is he? He's looking for a counterfeiter's plates." She flinched as if he'd struck her. "That's a lie." "Is it?" James pressed, his patience gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. Anger at her for lying, for putting his daughter in this danger. "Is it a lie that your husband was printing fake $20 bills? Is it a lie that his partner, Victor Marsh, wants those plates? Is it a lie that your U.S. Marshal brother-in-law is helping him hunt you down?" Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. For a long moment, James just stood there, watching her, the anger warring with a reluctant pity. He had wanted to be right. He had wanted to expose the lie. But seeing her crumble like this, it didn't feel like a victory. Finally, she looked up, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were blazing with a defiant fire he hadn't seen before. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It's all true." The story came tumbling out of her then, a torrent of fear and desperation held back for 2 long years. Charles had been a brilliant engraver, a true artist, but he'd also been a weak man, a gambler who fell in deep with Victor Marsh. Marsh wasn't a partner, he was a predator. He'd forced Charles into counterfeiting to pay off his debts. "I didn't know," Catherine insisted, her voice raw. "Not at first. I thought his business was struggling. I just knew there was always this fear in him, this shadow." When Charles died, Marsh came calling. He didn't want the dress shop she'd built from nothing. He wanted the plates. He was convinced Charles had told her where they were hidden. "But he didn't!" she cried. "Charles died without telling me anything. I don't have them. I've never even seen them." Marsh didn't believe her. He sent men, They threatened her. They beat her the first time, not as badly as this last time, but enough to make her understand. So she ran. She took Lucy, sold what little she could, and vanished. "We've been moving ever since," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Town to town, always looking over our shoulder. Every time we started to feel safe, Frank, the marshal, would find us. He'd show up, asking questions, and we'd have to run again." She looked up at James, her eyes pleading. "The cabin. We were at the end of our rope. We had no money left. I heard Paradise Valley was remote. I thought maybe we could finally disappear." The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. James looked at this woman, this stranger. She had lied to him, deceived him, brought a world of danger to his doorstep. He should throw her out. Right now. Tell her to take her daughter and her pack of lies and get off his land. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing to do. But then he looked at her bruised face, her broken arm. He thought of her little girl, Lucy, her face bright with a safety she hadn't known in years. He thought of Emma, who had a sister for the first time in her life. And he knew he couldn't do it. His stubborn pride, his deep-seated instinct to protect the helpless, it wouldn't let him. "You're right about one thing," he said slowly, the words forming in his mind as he spoke them. "Running won't work. They'll never stop looking for you. As long as they think you have those plates, you and Lucy will never be safe." "Then what can I do?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. An idea began to form in his mind, a crazy, reckless, and utterly insane idea. But the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. "They are hunting for a widow," he said, thinking aloud. "A single woman named Kate Peterson, a woman who is vulnerable, alone, easy to intimidate." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "But if you weren't a widow, if you were married again, to someone with land, with a reputation, someone with roots so deep in this valley that no one would dare to cross them." Catherine stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, slowly understanding the impossible thing he was suggesting. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," James said, his voice dropping, the words feeling heavy and strange in his own mouth, "that they wouldn't be looking for Kate Peterson. They'd find Mrs. James Thornton, the wife of the largest rancher in Paradise Valley, and they would find that she is very, very well protected." The silence in the room was absolute. It stretched between them, thick with the weight of his words. "You're proposing marriage?" Catherine's voice was a choked whisper. "To me? A woman you've known for just over a week? A woman who just admitted to lying to you?" "I'm proposing a business arrangement," James corrected, though even to his own ears it sounded like a weak excuse. "A contract. You and Lucy get a home, legal protection, safety, and I get—" He paused. What did he get? He thought of the empty chair at his dinner table for the last 9 years. He thought of Emma's quiet, solitary childhood. He thought of the way the house had come alive in the last week. "I get a mother for my daughter," he said finally. "Someone to run this house. And maybe," he added, the words more honest than he'd intended, "we both get a second chance at something that looks like a family." "You don't even know me," she protested, shaking her head in disbelief. "I know enough," he countered, his voice firm. "I know you've survived things that would have broken most people. I know you've kept your daughter safe against impossible odds. And I know you sent that little girl on a 7-mile run through a blizzard to save your life." He held her gaze. "That's enough to build on." "And what if I say no?" "Then you stay here until you're healed," he said, without hesitation. "And when spring comes, I'll give you enough money to get a fresh start somewhere far away from here. But I'm betting you're tired of running, Catherine. I'm betting you want Lucy to have a real home, a real childhood." She looked out the window again, at the 2 small figures in the distance, their laughter just barely audible on the wind. He could see the war playing out on her face, the fear against the hope, the pride against the desperation. What would people say? She whispered. A rancher marrying a penniless stranger he just took in? They'll call you a fool. Let them talk, James said with a shrug. People in this valley know me. They know I don't do things without a good reason. They'll say Emma needed a mother. They'll say this big empty house needed a woman's touch. He moved closer, standing over her. This time, she didn't flinch. And in a few months, when your brother-in-law comes sniffing around Paradise Valley, he won't find a frightened widow hiding in a cabin. He'll find Mrs. James Thornton, and he'll find a husband who takes his marriage vows very, very seriously. He saw the last of her resistance crumble. He saw the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had been fighting alone for too long. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face, looking for the catch, the angle, the lie. He just stood there and let her look. Let her see the simple, stubborn truth of his offer. Finally, she extended her good hand. "All right, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You have yourself an arrangement." He took her hand. It felt small and surprisingly warm in his own massive grip. The handshake of a woman who had just made a deal with the devil. Or an angel. He wasn't sure which one he was just yet. They were married 3 weeks later. The ceremony was a quiet, awkward affair held in the front parlor of the ranch house. The circuit judge came out from Cedar Falls. Doc Henderson stood up as James's witness, and Tom Pritchard, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, gave the bride away. Catherine wore a simple dress of dark blue wool that she and Emma had sewn together. The color brought out the deep, stormy gray of her eyes, now that the bruising had finally faded. Lucy and Emma stood beside them, holding hands, their faces glowing with an uncomplicated joy that the adults couldn't quite manage. As James looked at his daughter, her face radiant with a happiness he hadn't seen since before her mother died, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had made the right choice. Arrangement or not, this was right. But that night, the reality of their strange bargain came crashing down. After a small, subdued supper, after the girls were tucked into bed, the house fell silent. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a wedding night. James found Catherine in the kitchen, scrubbing a pot with a fierce energy, her one good hand working furiously. "You should be resting," he said from the doorway. "Doc said not to overdo it." "I'm fine," she said without looking up. "I need to start pulling my weight." "Catherine," he waited until she finally stopped scrubbing and looked at him. "You don't have to prove anything, not to me." "Yes, I do," she snapped, her voice sharp with a surprising ferocity. "This arrangement, this marriage, it only works if I hold up my end. I will not be a charity case. I will not be a burden in your home." "You're not a burden," he said, and the words were rough with an emotion he couldn't name. He stepped into the kitchen, into her space. You're what this house has needed for a long time, what Emma has needed." He paused, the next words catching in his throat. "What I've needed." Her expression softened, the fight going out of her eyes. "James, I've been alone for a long time," he confessed, the words feeling like they were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. "Not lonely, there's a difference, but alone. And then you and Lucy came, and suddenly this place feels like a home again, not just a house where Emma and I live." He gave a small, self-conscious smile. "So no, you're not a burden. If you want the truth, you're an unexpected blessing." She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "I spent 2 years being so angry," she said softly. "Angry at Charles for dying and leaving me in that mess. Angry at the world. Angry at myself for not being strong enough." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've been so focused on running, on surviving, that I forgot what it felt like to not be afraid. To not have to check every shadow. To trust that the person you're talking to isn't trying to hurt you." He reached out then, slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek with his hand. His calloused palm was rough against her skin, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Both of you. I gave you my word." "I know." She leaned into his touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "And that's what scares me." "What does?" "That I might start to believe it," she whispered, her eyes locking with his. "That I might start wanting this to be real, not just an arrangement." His heart gave a hard kick against his ribs. And would that be so terrible? He saw it then, in her eyes. The same cautious hope, the same terrifying possibility that he'd been feeling himself. "Ask me again in a few months," she said, her voice barely audible. "When the fear has faded. When we know each other as more than just two desperate people making a deal." She pulled back from his touch, slowly, reluctantly. "I'm still learning how to stop running, James. Be patient with me." "I'm a patient man," he said, though at that moment he felt anything but. They didn't share a bed that night. It was part of the arrangement. Separate rooms. A marriage on paper only. But as James lay awake in his own cold, empty bed, staring at the ceiling, he knew, with a sinking feeling, that the walls of their arrangement were already starting to crumble, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what would happen when they finally came down. Spring arrived in Paradise Valley like a sudden, violent flood. The snow melted in great sheets, turning the creeks into roaring, muddy torrents. The world turned from white to brown to a vibrant, shocking green almost overnight. Life on the ranch fell into a new rhythm. James and his men worked from before sunrise to long after sunset, mending fences, moving the herd to higher pastures, and preparing for the chaos of calving season. Catherine, true to her word, took over the running of the household with a quiet, fierce efficiency that amazed him. She wasn't just pulling her weight. She was an anchor. She organized the pantry, planted a sprawling herb and vegetable garden, and somehow managed to turn the rustic, masculine ranch house into a place of genuine comfort and warmth. She taught Emma things James never could have: how to sew a straight seam, how to arrange wildflowers in a jar, how to be strong without being hard. Lucy, nourished by regular meals and the balm of safety, blossomed. The haunted look in her eyes was replaced by a mischievous sparkle. She and Emma were true sisters now, their days filled with shared chores, lessons, and endless adventures across the ranch. James and Catherine continued their careful dance around each other. They were partners, allies. They discussed the ranch finances in the evenings. They made decisions about the household together. They presented a united front to the world. But in the quiet moments, when the girls were asleep and the house was still, a different kind of tension hummed between them. The unspoken thing. The arrangement that was feeling less and less like an arrangement every day. He learned the small things about her. That she sang softly to herself when she kneaded bread dough. That she was a crack shot with a rifle, a fact he discovered when a coyote got too close to the chicken coop. That the sound of thunderstorms terrified her, sending her into a silent, white-knuckled state she refused to explain. She, in turn, learned his rhythms. That he took his coffee black and strong. That he still read to Emma every single night, his deep voice rumbling through the floorboards. That sometimes he woke up from nightmares about Sarah's death and would walk the property until dawn, unable to find sleep again. They were two strangers, bound by a lie, slowly, cautiously, building a life together. And then, one evening in late April, the outside world came crashing in. James was in the barn, helping Tom with a difficult birth, when one of the younger ranch hands came running, his face pale. "Boss, you better come up to the house, quick. There's a man on the porch, a lawman. He's asking questions about a widow from Denver." Ice flooded James's veins. He grabbed his rifle from the rack by the door and ran. The man stood on his porch. He was tall and lean, dressed in a tailored city suit that looked ridiculous and out of place against the rough-hewn logs of the house. A gleaming U.S. Marshal's badge was pinned to his vest, and he had a smile that didn't come anywhere near his cold, calculating eyes. "Can I help you?" James asked, his voice deceptively calm. He positioned himself squarely in the doorway, blocking the man's view into the house, his rifle held loosely but ready at his side. "Marshal Frank Peterson," the man said, his smile widening. "I'm looking for my sister-in-law, Catherine Peterson. I have reason to believe she may have passed through this area." Sister-in-law. The word dripped with false concern. "Peterson," James said, keeping his face a neutral mask. "Can't say I've heard the name." "A tragic situation," the marshal continued, his eyes scanning past James, trying to peer into the house. "She vanished with her daughter after my poor brother Charles passed away. Left behind substantial debts to his business partner. We're just trying to find her, to help her settle the estate." "A U.S. Marshal chasing down a widow over civil debts?" James raised an eyebrow. "Seems a little outside your jurisdiction, Marshal." The smile vanished from Frank Peterson's face. "The woman also stole money," he said, his voice turning hard, "and made false accusations against a respected businessman. It's my duty to find her." "Your duty is to uphold the law," James said, taking a deliberate step forward, forcing the marshal to take a step back. "Not to act as a private collection agent for your dead brother's crooked friends." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Thornton. You don't know who you're protecting." "And you don't know who you're threatening," James countered, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Now I'm going to give you some free advice. You get on your horse, you ride out of this valley, and you don't come back, because we protect our own here. And my wife," he said, emphasizing the word, "is one of our own." "Your wife?" Peterson scoffed, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "My wife," James repeated firmly. "Mrs. Catherine Thornton." He saw the calculation in the marshal's eyes. The story wasn't adding up for him anymore. A scared, running widow was one thing. A woman married to a man like James Thornton was something else entirely. "I could get a warrant, search this property from top to bottom." "You could try," James said, his voice now flat and cold as a tombstone. "But I don't see a warrant now. What I do see is you, on my land, harassing my family. Tom." His foreman appeared from the corner of the barn, flanked by two other ranch hands, all of them holding rifles. "Escort the marshal off our property," James ordered. "Make sure he doesn't get lost on his way out." Frank Peterson stared at James, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew he was beaten for now. He turned without another word, mounted his horse, and rode away, but not before turning back to shout one last threat. "This isn't over, Thornton. You have no idea what she's capable of." James watched until he was out of sight. Then he turned and went back into the house, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Catherine in the pantry, backed into the corner, her face as white as a sheet. She had heard everything. "He found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew he would. He's not going to stop. He'll figure it out. He'll come back." "He'll do nothing," James said, crossing the room in 2 strides. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since their wedding day, she didn't resist. She collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs. He held her tight, his hand stroking her hair. "You're my wife, Catherine. Legally, properly. Whatever claim he thinks he has is gone. You are under my protection, and I would like to see him try to get past me." "You don't understand," she sobbed into his chest. "You don't know what they're really like, what they'll do." "Then tell me," he said, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "Tell me everything. No more secrets. No more holding back. I can't fight what I can't see." And so she told him the final, darkest part of the story, the part she had been too terrified to admit even to herself. "I lied to you," she whispered, Her eyes squeezed shut. About the plates. Charles. He did tell me where they were. James felt his body go still. The night he died, she continued, her voice barely audible. He was delirious with fever. He kept murmuring things. A child's rhyme. The fox sleeps in the hollow log. The treasure's in the patchwork dog. I didn't understand. Not until after he was gone, and Marsh started threatening me. She took a shaky breath. Lucy had this old stuffed dog, a patchwork thing I'd made for her from scraps. It was falling apart. The night before we ran, I was mending it, and I felt something hard inside the stuffing. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with the memory of her terror. It was them, James, the engraving plates, 2 thin pieces of steel, wrapped in oilcloth. He had hidden them inside his own daughter's toy. The danger that had been a distant threat suddenly felt immediate, suffocating. It wasn't in Denver. It wasn't on the road with a corrupt marshal. It was here, in his house. "Where are they now?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "When we got here," she said, her voice trembling. "That first night, I was so scared. I knew I couldn't keep them. I had to hide them somewhere they would never look." She pointed a shaky finger toward the hearth. "The loose stone," she whispered. "Behind the fireplace, the 3rd one from the left." James stared at the fireplace, at the heart of his home, the source of its warmth and light, and he realized that they had been living with a ticking bomb, hidden in plain sight, this entire time. And Frank Peterson's visit had just lit the fuse. That night, for the first time, James didn't go to his own room. After Catherine's confession, a new, terrible understanding had settled between them. They were no longer just parties in an arrangement. They were co-conspirators, bound together by a dangerous secret. He found her sitting by the fire in the main room, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames as if she could see the future in them. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, the silence stretching out between them. "We have to get rid of them," she said finally, her voice flat. "Throw them in the deepest part of the creek. Bury them, whatever it takes." "No," James said slowly, the gears of a desperate plan turning in his mind. "If we do that, they'll never stop hunting you. They'll just assume you have them hidden somewhere else. They'll tear this place apart. They'll hurt you. They'll hurt the girls. There's only one way to end this." "How?" she asked, her eyes full of a renewed fear. "We go on the offensive," he said, his voice hardening. "We stop running. We stop hiding. We set a trap. And we use the one thing they want more than anything as the bait." Catherine stared at him, horrified. "You want to use the plates?" "They think you're a scared, helpless woman," James explained, his voice low and intense. "Let's let them keep thinking that. We'll leak a message, get word back to Victor Marsh. We'll tell him the widow Peterson is desperate. She's ready to sell the plates. For a price." "They'll kill me," she whispered. "No," James said, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "They'll try, but they won't be meeting you alone. They'll be walking into our trap." He spent the next 2 days planning. He rode out and met with Tom, with Sheriff Morrison, and with a handful of other trusted ranchers in the valley. He told them a modified version of the truth, that his wife was being blackmailed by her late husband's enemies, and that they needed to put an end to it. He didn't have to ask for their help twice. In Paradise Valley, a threat to one was a threat to all. The plan was simple, and incredibly dangerous. Catherine would agree to meet Victor Marsh and Frank Peterson at a remote line shack on the far edge of James's property. She would show them the plates to prove she was serious. And when the money was exchanged, James and the others would move in. The night before the meeting, the tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Emma and Lucy, sensing the fear in the adults, were quiet and subdued. Catherine moved like a ghost, her face pale, her hands trembling. That evening, James found her in their room, her room, packing a small bag. "Just in case," she said, not looking at him. If something goes wrong, there's money sewn into the lining of this coat, enough for you to get the girls somewhere safe. Nothing is going to go wrong, he said, his voice more confident than he felt. You don't know that, she said, finally looking at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. James, you don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. I made it my fight, he said, stepping closer. The day I put my ring on your finger. He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. I love you, Catherine, he said, the words coming out rough and true. I know this started as a deal, an arrangement, but somewhere along the line, it became real. For me, it's real. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so scared. I know. So am I. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, desperate kiss that was filled with all the fear and hope and love that had grown between them in the shadows of their lies. When they broke apart, she was crying, but she was smiling too. I love you too, James Thornton. And if we get through this, I want the real thing. No more arrangements. No more separate rooms. Then we'll get through it, he said, sealing the promise with another kiss. The next day dawned gray and cold. Catherine rode out to the line shack alone, the plates wrapped in oilcloth in her saddlebag. James and the other men were already in position, hidden in the rocks and trees surrounding the shack, a silent, deadly reception committee. The wait was agonizing. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching horses. Every shadow seemed to move. And then they came. 2 riders emerging from the trees. Victor Marsh, a big, ugly man with a cruel mouth, and Frank Peterson, his marshal's badge gleaming smugly on his chest. James watched through his spyglass as Catherine met them outside the shack. He saw her show them the plates. He saw Marsh's greedy smile. He saw Peterson hand over a heavy bag of money, and then he saw Marsh pull his gun. The signal was given. A single sharp whistle from Tom, and all hell broke loose. Shots rang out from the rocks. Frank Peterson went down first, clutching his chest. Victor Marsh, roaring with rage, used Catherine as a shield, dragging her back toward the shack. James's heart stopped. He broke cover, running, his rifle firing. He saw a puff of dust from Marsh's shoulder as a bullet hit home. The big man staggered, loosening his grip on Catherine just enough. Now! She screamed, ramming her elbow back into his broken ribs. Marsh howled in pain and surprise, his grip faltering for a split second. It was all the opening James needed. He fired again. The shot was true. Victor Marsh dropped like a stone. It was over in less than a minute. James ran to Catherine, grabbing her, checking her for injuries, his hands shaking. I'm all right, she said, breathless, clinging to him. I'm all right. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, assuring himself that she was real, that she was safe. The aftermath was messy. The territorial marshals came, took statements, and cleaned up the bodies. The story they were given was simple. A brave rancher and his wife had defended themselves against criminals. The counterfeit plates were handed over, and the case of Kate Peterson, the counterfeiter's widow, was officially closed. A year later, James and Catherine stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Emma and Lucy race their ponies down toward the creek. Their laughter drifted back on the warm summer breeze. Catherine's belly was round and full, their first child together due in the fall. I still can't believe it sometimes, she said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. That it's real, that we're safe, that we're home. Believe it, James said, wrapping his arms around her, his big hands resting gently on her stomach. You stopped running, Catherine. You stood and you fought, and you planted roots right here. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, her eyes full of a love so deep it still took his breath away. Thank you, James, for opening the door that night. No, he said, kissing her forehead. Thank you for knocking. He smiled, looking out at his daughters, his wife, his land, his life. Besides, I'm the one who got lucky. I was just a stubborn man in a lonely house. Now look at me. From the creek, Emma's voice called out, "Mama, Papa, come see, Lucy caught a fish." Catherine laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. "We're being summoned." "That we are," James said, and together they walked down the hill to join their family. Not an arrangement, not a deal, a family, forged in danger, built on lies, but made real by love. And it was stronger than steel. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Every week, we bring you tales of courage, survival, and the unbreakable human spirit. And if this story moved you, consider leaving a comment below. We love hearing from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.